Corner to Corner podcast. My name's Jeff, and his name is
Paul.
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Yes, marvellous.
Good. Your voice has gone odd.
Has it? Well, I don't know
Yeah.
what you're talking about, you beastly man. Honestly. Do you deserve respect? Is that what you think? I'll have you know that is not the way we do things around here. Respect is earned. That was me trying to be a Sylvester twin. Admittedly, it wasn't good, but nonetheless, I thought it might just give listeners a kind of flavour of what we're going to be talking about today.
Yes, well, this is the first in a series of episodes that we're going to be doing to celebrate the Sixth Doctor and his companions and his adventures. And we're both big fans of Sixie and
Big fans.
Mr. Colin Baker. So we wanted to
It's got a scratchy armpit there.
we wanted to shine a spotlight on his Doctor and take a look at some of his adventures and audios and books and comics as well.
Stuff, yeah.
So we said, well, how should we kick this off? And Paul suggested that we take a look at the twin dilemma.
Yeah, sorry about that, guys, but I thought it was a great idea because I haven't seen it for a long old time, to be honest. It's been ages.
Really?
Yeah,
Well,
it's been a long
I just
time.
want to bring something up here. So this was Colin's first appearance, first full appearance as the Doctor, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
In the last serial of season 21.
Yes.
And I have seen this one a long time ago. But this story has
How are you going to put it?
People don't
Choose your
like
words,
it.
my friend.
And according to TARDIS Wiki, in 1998, 2009, 2014, it was voted the worst Doctor Who television story
I
ever.
remember it well.
And
yeah.
in 2023, it was voted the worst Sixth Doctor story.
Mm-hmm.
And in SFX magazine, Russell the Davies cited it as the beginning of the end of Doctor Who. So that's what the perception
we're up
was
against.
of this episode. But before we discuss it, we have some speak pipe messages from some of our listeners talking about the Sixth Doctor, don't we?
We do.
And Paul, tell me, why are you a fan of Sixie?
I love Sixie. I think he's colourful, he's outrageous, he's bombastic, he's always the biggest person in the room, and he has a confidence about himself which is almost unparalleled in the history of Doctor Who. I don't think we see anything like Sixie until we get to the 12th Doctor by Peter Capaldi. You know, it's that brilliant confidence which is so massive, and the ego that goes with it, which is so driving, which affects everybody and everything around it, and yet it's so high-pitched, it very often overreaches into arrogance, and that becomes an effect on a lot of the stories and the people around him as well, where, you know what I mean, where that confidence just crosses a red line, and because of that, we get some really interesting character dynamics and story kind of twists, if you like. So that's what I like. But I love the costume as well. I think the costume is brilliant.
Yeah, I listened to audios today, or read about it in a book and stuff. And there's always a dig about the costume. Look at the dressed like a clown or something, and I kind of he looks cool. It's good.
I wouldn't go that far. But but I think it's great. It's just so unique.
Exactly,
Whenever the Doctor walks into a room in any incarnation, generally people stop and take notice. I think that probably wasn't so much the case with the Fifth Doctor, who was kind of always a little bit discreet and always seemed a little bit in the background. I love the Fifth Doctor. So the contrast between him and the Sixth, who is completely the opposite of that, is just unreal. And I love that contrast. It's brilliant.
Yeah, I think they had to do something after Peter's Fifth Doctor to make another a distinction between the two personas of 5 and 6, and much like 11 to 12 and things, and doing too similar would have just been kind of rehashing the same thing, and we'll come onto things a little bit more later, I'm sure. But I really like Colin's Doctor, and it's funny, you hear, worst Doctor, and everyone hates him, and you think, okay, well, blimey, let's have a look at this. And I remember kind of going into it with these sort of preconceived notions, and then thinking, what the hell are people talking about?
So had you seen much Sixth Doctor before then? So you'd heard a lot of the kind of spin, the fan perception before you watched?
All of that. Yeah, and I'd watched various stories on DVD and stuff when I was buying that lot, and obviously I've watched the 2 collection sets that have been released now, and I've listened to a ton of the audios, and when I first watched one of his things, like I said, I was like, well, I don't understand what people are talking about, and
what's all the fuss?
Yeah, what's all the fuss? And I really like Colin's Doctor for all the reasons that you listed. He's very kind of theatrical and sort of over the top, but quoting things, and like that in the Twin Dilemma, he walks out the TARDIS with his arms folded like this, then he comes out and he puts his arms out.
Gestures,
It's so silly. But watching the Twin Dilemma, it struck me that he's quite pompous and arrogant here, and his post-regeneration thing has gone a bit crackers, and he's not as he's come out a bit different, and more kind of shouty and semi-aggressive and pompous and all of that than the Doctor might usually do post-regen, which I thought was quite interesting. There is obviously an infamous moment that we'll discuss shortly, but despite all of that stuff, I still I watched it and I thought he's the Doctor, and it reminded me much of Capaldi's Doctor, who started kind of abrasive, rude, brash, callous to an extent, and all of that, and was softened across his series, in something that you could call a character arc, if you wanted to. And I don't think that Colin's Doctor had the chance to fully do that on TV due to Michael Grade. But, in his audios, he's, and I hate when people say, Colin's Doctor was given good writing on audio and stuff, and, the chance to shine. I think Big Finish gave his Doctor the chance to be expanded and to be, to
gave
reveal
him the scope.
His scope and reveal his true colours and all the facets of it. And I don't think it was a case of he was quote unquote badly written on TV at all. I think it's probably a lot of, again, preconceived notions about it all, and you see nowadays a lot of Sixie love, and I think people have realised actually all of that stuff that was said about him, it was frankly not really true.
Well, again, it's this stuff used to happen in the 80s just as much as it happens nowadays. You have a bunch of fans who have a very, very loud voice, and with a whole bunch of them in them days writing in fanzines and letters to Doctor Who magazine and one thing and another. That was how they kind of became, or how they expressed their dislike, if you like, right? And they were really, really quite dismissive of Colin for a long time, and then even more so when Sylvester McCoy. And it was always the same noises, the same people, the same names, right? And weirdly, some of those, or at least one of those, is still around today. We shall not mention that name, but because we all know who that person is, my God, are they a pain in the fucking ass? But spoiling it for everybody else. But you know what I mean? It for everybody, you've just got to watch these things yourself and just make your own mind up. And,
exactly.
Granted, the Sixth Doctor is not going to appeal to everybody, because I think all the Doctor's character traits, and I think you're right, Jeff, everything there is the Doctor, it's definably the Doctor. But it's like everything's dialed up to 11, right? And he jumps from one of those moods to another. The mood swings are quite extreme and quite violent, and they're all right at the top. They're right up into the red zone. Yeah. And obviously that was planned. He was going to start like that, and then, like you said, be kind of softened. But because we only got one full season after the Twin Dilemma, then we got Trial of the Time Lord, and then he was sacked. That was it. The arc that was planned for the character never got the chance to get right off the ground, so we never saw that journey played out in full. So it is great, that Big Finish, of being able to kind of pick up that baton and show us kind of what might have been. So Sixie has for sure lived and breathed even more so on audio than he did on TV. But the TV adventures, they're there. They're gold
really
dust.
good.
They are jewels in the crown.
And we've talked to Colin on the podcast, and
We did.
If
great
you
fun.
haven't listened to that, go and check that episode out. He was absolutely wonderful. Everything we kind of hoped for and more. Witty, sharp.
Very sharp,
clever,
very sharp, very
full
clever,
full of tales, and it's been great to see him embraced by the fandom and his Doctor, and his Doctor to be kind of reappraised by so many people, because he was, understandably and genuinely, I think, quite hurt and upset by the treatment he had by both the show and the fans. There was something I read a while ago. He was so upset by, being voted worst Doctor and worst stories and stuff in DWM that he wouldn't talk to the magazine for a long time. And, people think, but he's just a person like you and I, and he may be an actor and on TV, and, the job is, on a higher, more visible platform than some of us might have, but getting criticised doesn't mean you're immune to it.
No,
so
especially when you've got other stuff to kind of deal with as well. And I think Colin was going through some issues back at home at the same time as that, so it would have made it very, very difficult to cope with all of this stuff.
And so I don't blame him at all for feeling that way, and it's been wonderful to see it change, shift, and him to be embraced like this. And now he's such a wonderful supporter of the show, and particularly Jodie's Doctor, and probably there's some similarities there in terms of how some corners of the fandom were with her and stuff, and him, and then of course he had his triumphant return in Power of the Doctor a couple of years ago, on the edge there with the others. It was great to see him again, and as Chris Chibnall said, you're back where you belong. So I think he's brilliant. So before we get into chatting about the twin dilemma, why don't we take a listen to what a couple of our listeners think of Colin's Doctor?
Okay, who should we play first? Shall we go to Gareth Bowley, who sent us 2 voice notes? I haven't listened to these. Have you listened to these?
No, I like to hear them anew.
Yep, here we go. This is Gareth Bowley telling us what he thinks, so let's have a listen to this.
Hello, Gareth Bowley here. So, the Sixth Doctor, and my verdict is he is simply wonderful.
Yes!
My personal favourite show is The Trial of a Time Lord, the first show that even got me into Doctor Who when I was 8 years old, and I've been here ever since. Without The Trial of a Time Lord, without the Sixth Doctor, there is no me. And so I owe everything I am to that programme and to the Sixth Doctor himself, because it's him that drew me into the show. And, he's never actually left the show as far as I'm concerned. Yes, we have an exercise bike falling over in Time of the Rani, but as far as I'm concerned, he is still out there, still having adventures, wonderful books and audios. Oh, there are too many to mention. The Marion Conspiracy, Spectre of Lanyon Moor.
Yes.
All wonderful things. And the nice thing is, I actually had the pleasure of telling Colin how much he and his Doctor meant to me personally as a child, and how much they influenced me as I've gotten older, and how I am so grateful to have actually had the ability to tell him this. And deep down, I hope we get another 40 more years of this colourful, erudite individual, and that it never changes.
Thank you, Jeff.
Fantastic.
How lovely is
There
that?
you
That's
go.
brilliant.
That's a love letter, isn't it? Love that.
And you got to
Brilliant.
tell
Thank
Colin.
you, Gareth.
Amazing.
That is astonishing. I get where Gareth's coming from there, because I think for me personally, my kind of fan card, if you like, was fully stamped in the Peter Davison years. But then, by the time it got to the Colin Baker era, I was full into it. I was full stream by that point, you know what I mean? So Colin Baker was the first kind of Doctor I'd watched as a fan from the beginning, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So, and it was just at that period of my life in sort of, kind of mid-teens. That's how old I am, but that that when, it's just a very nostalgic time. I can remember where I was when The Mysterious Planet came on, when, and where I was when the Twin Dilemma played out, and all of those sort of things. You know what I mean? They're just really vivid memories. And Colin's silhouette, that colourful figure at the centre of all this is really strong, really prominent. So yeah, thanks for that, Gareth. I totally get where you're coming from there, mate.
So who else have we got to discuss the Sixth Doctor?
We have also got, let's have a look, we've got Ian Banks. Should we listen to Ian, see what he's got to say? Right, come on, Ian. What about the Sixth Doctor?
Ian Banks here.
Hi,
I'm
mate.
walking my dog this morning, so you might see the occasional car in the background. Like that.
Yep, that was a car. Mm-hmm.
Sixth Doctor. Didn't quite take to Colin Bakers Doctor the first time I saw him. After I got used to his performance, I thought he was an absolute standout. I didn't particularly like his stories terribly much, but he was always terrific, and I think my favourite story of his would probably be The Mysterious Planet.
Ooh.
On Big Finish, I think it might be The Sandman, where he plays this bogeyman to the Clutch, who are a race of insectile reptilian creatures, until things start to get real and he turns into their hero instead, which is awesome. But for me, peak Sixth Doctor is the comic range from Doctor Who monthly during his run, which was just fantastic.
Yes!
Artwork by John Ridgway, he had Frobisher, and you just had some absolutely bonkers, brilliant stories in it as well. So yeah, mixed bag from the Doctor, but when he's good, he's very, very good.
Brilliant. That was ending on another car passing there, all the way from the Land of Oz.
It was just in the background somewhere.
Do they have cars out there? I thought they all travelled by horseback or something. I thought it was a bit uncivilised. I'm joking, obviously. I know there's really civilization in Australia. Of course there is. I've seen Neighbours. Sorry, go on.
We'll come to Big Finish at some point. In a little bit, I'll quickly go through some of the stories I've liked, but we'll look at things in more detail. But the comics is interesting there, because there's one that came out recently that Colin wrote, and I was looking for it the other day to try and find a copy of it.
He told us about that in our podcast.
Yeah, he did, so I need to try and find that, and I want to check out some of the DWM ones there as well.
But we can talk about that when we do the comics
Yes,
thing.
we will do.
Yes.
So who else have we got to talk about Sixie?
We have also got the fabulous Katie Hynes.
Six is a doctor that I don't know as well as I should, but having seen Colin at multiple conventions, he is just the sweetest, most wonderful man. And I squealed when I saw him empower the Doctor. Like, I knew who he is. I knew. And there was one, I remember when I first got into the Whovian community, everyone was saying, oh, Six is not the best Doctor. But I kept seeing, like, GIFs of him, or GIFs, depending on how you pronounce it. And he just seemed so lively and so full of life. I need to find more of his, you know what? There is one speech of his that I do remember because I performed it. I should have stayed here. The oldest civilization, decadent, degenerate, and rotten to the core. Oh, yeah. Oh, I love Six is brilliant. Never forget. Every doctor is someone's doctor, and every doctor is the doctor.
100%. That's so true, isn't it? Thank you for that,
Yeah,
Katie.
thanks, Katie. That kind of sums up, what I was just saying there. This preconception about what the Sixth Doctor was like, and then when people discover him, actually, they realise all of that is nonsense.
Poppycock.
Yeah, to probably quote him. So, hopefully with this series that we're going to do, Katie might find some Sixth Doctor stuff to check out, to listen to, and hopefully other people will as well. So, Paul, I believe we also have Lucy McCaul.
We do.
I have just dropped in another audio into Dropbox for you, if you can get that up whilst you play Lucy's file about Sixie.
Because I can do that. I can multitask. But yeah, while we do that, let's listen to the wonderfully luminescent Lucy McCaul. Dropbox. Here we go. Right.
Hello, it's Lucy here. I wanted to drop in a note about Sixie, or the Sixth Doctor, and say that although I didn't appreciate him as much when I was younger, I really do now.
Yay.
My favourite adventure for him is probably Vengeance on Varos, which is a nasty little story. But I love how he works things out and how he looks for his opportunity to take control of the situation and seizes it with both hands. And I'd also like to add that I've met Colin Baker once and seen him on a couple of panels, and he is one of the warmest, loveliest people I've ever encountered at a Doctor Who event. So, yes, hurrah for Sixie.
Hurrah for Sixie!
Yeah, hurrah for Sixie indeed.
Yes,
thank you.
Love
Lucy.
that.
That was
Brilliant.
And another person there, discovering, Sixie as they get into it.
So, do you want me to play this one, which I've just grabbed from Dropbox now and downloaded onto my desktop, then uploaded onto this thing, then changed the file into an MP3 file, and then coded it so it can actually play live in our podcast?
Yes, please.
Brilliant, let's do that. This is from Brandon Foley, so let's see what Brandon has to say about Sixie.
Comparing the Sixth Doctor's era to, like, the Fourth Doctor's would be nothing. Like, because obviously Tom Baker's era is incredible, but I feel like the Sixth Doctor's era is so underrated. I mean, he isn't the best Doctor. I'm not going to argue with that.
Where's that stop button?
But he's got some cracking stories in his era which make me smile and laugh and intrigued whenever I watch them. And the supporting characters are amazing in those stories, and the ideas that are, well, in my opinion, written out not as good as they could be, are still incredible. I would think that Colin is best in this first season 22, not season 21. But yeah, season 22 is amazing, and I feel like every story in there deserves to be marked as really good. Even Time Lash, yes, I know that's a highly underrated serial.
Absolutely, I love it.
But yeah, I think Colin Baker's era is absolutely incredible. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Brandon.
Thank you, Brandon. Brilliant. Thank you for that. Not sure when he says Colin Baker is not the best Doctor, but we've all got our opinions.
We have.
Why
and
not?
Do you know what? Brandon was respectful about it all there, which I think is so important. If you disagree with someone, or you feel like that, he felt like Sixth isn't his favourite Doctor, that's absolutely fine. But what he said there is, the stories and the ideas and things. So that's also a really interesting view on it, because we can't all love every Doctor equally. Things connect differently. But that was really nice. So.
It's really nice and interesting what he says about ideas there as well, because coming on to the story we're talking about right now, the ideas in the Tween Dilemma are absolutely bonkers, but wild and crazy and just magnificent.
I'm just going to read a few comments. So
okay, so we're not talking about the story yet.
No, we are. So I posted on Twitter about that we were going to cover it, and Vertigo Fox says, "You're going to yipe. Well, good luck." And I put a Dalek gif going, "Explain," and he said, "No, I don't really have anything good to say about it, but I'd much rather you changed my mind than the other way around."
Challenge accepted.
Challenge accepted. So I went into this sort of thinking, everyone seems to hate this one, worst story ever, blah blah blah. Let's have a look. I don't know what anyone's talking about. I quite enjoyed this. In fact, I enjoyed it quite a lot.
I thought you might, actually.
Honestly, I was like, what? Like, genuinely, why? So, let's say you took out the incident with Peri that we'll come to. Would people still have hated it? Has that moment that was...
overshadowed everything else, perhaps?
Has it overshadowed everything? It
that's
was
a good question.
Probably ill-advised. I understand what they were trying to do, create some drama and all of that, I enjoyed this one a lot. I've got twin girls. I liked the twins in this. I thought their pudding bowl haircuts were fantastic. They were weird. which
well.
I quite enjoyed. Mestor, I've put here on my notes. He's great. He's horrible. Like he looks like a sluggy moth owl mashup. He's mean and horrible. Why?
He is quite nasty, isn't he?
Yeah. Why hasn't he returned? Well, obviously by the end, he's had salt poured on him.
He's pretty well dissolved, isn't he?
But
although saying that, his consciousness, which was part of Asmail at the end, was kind of excised. Maybe that's still hovering around somewhere in the quantum verse, ready to pick up, or maybe it attached itself to the Doctor's coat and has been there all this time, perhaps. Who
maybe
knows?
What we'll find out in Series 2 is that Mestor has been slugged up the side of the TARDIS since...
stuck on there. He's been making his way up for the last however many centuries since then. Yeah.
The Doctor was going to meet Miss Tor, who is a IT genius.
So you're just being nasty, Jack. Behave. Stop that. Come on, Twin Dilemma.
So I thought he had a fantastic look to him. He was cruel. I thought he was a really good villain. I'd like to have seen him return at some point with some sci-fi shenanigans to do that. I thought the Jacondan aliens, those sort of bird-like creatures, look really good as well.
They look kind of strange.
Yeah,
their silver head and their floaty eyebrows and their chins and their pointy noses and their ears and their tufts and all that going on. Yeah,
all that. I thought they looked really good as well. There was some nice bits in this with the camera kind of panning and then doing kind of a couple of overlap shots. You could see that the show was trying to be more than its budget was allowing. So there's a shot where it panned and then the Doctor materialised in the TARDIS, or there was one where Peri is transmatted away and Colin is in the same position, and then it sort of transitions into it. So those were quite nice little things that I thought were good. Asmail, I thought, was quite an interesting character, and it felt a bit Moffat to me in that the Doctor meets the guy, and there's a history that we don't know, because that used to happen quite a bit with Moffat, like what was the big blue guy called? Mulvo? I can't remember his name.
Him. Yeah.
God, I can't remember his name.
Whoever he was.
Yeah, but they'd apparently known each other for centuries or something, but we'd never seen it. So I kind of liked that there was this history between them. I'm sort of surprised it's not really been explored that much since that there. I thought Peri was really good. Nicola Bryant, we'll need to celebrate her at some point as well. There's quite a fiery relationship between the two of them, but despite the pomposity and the arrogance and stuff and their sort of bickering, he's quite surprised to see that she cared about him when she thinks he's died. And despite the because it is a shock for a companion when a Doctor changes, especially when they do what he does, but she still cared and still wanted to be with him and kind of probably make sure that he was all right and everything. And I guess the Doctor was aware of like he was being a bit crazy, and so her compassion for him kind of actually surprised him, I think, and he probably didn't feel like he deserved it or was worthy of it. There's a bit at the very end when Colin says, "I am the Doctor, whether you like it or not." I thought that was a nice line because he's the new Doctor. It's quite unusual to finish a series with the new Doctor in a full story like that, and so you get this big jarring contrast to Peter's Doctor, and I just thought it was quite. He might as well have looked at the camera. And said it to the audience,
fourth wall breaking, almost.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So I enjoyed the story. There's a bonkers sci-fi plot, which kind of reminded me a little bit of Stolen Earth. They want to move the two planets around Jaconda and assimilate them into it or something like that to make stuff grow again. And you've got slug eggs and all of that kind of stuff, and concrete hardening slug trails and things like that. Like there's
a lot of weird stuff.
Yeah,
in there, isn't
there's
there?
lots going on.
Bizarre.
So the only kind of thing, maybe I missed it or it wasn't quite clear enough, is how did they know about the twins to take them from their home?
Oh, you're asking me? So
Yeah.
I thought it was a rhetorical
No.
question. I don't know. No idea, mate. Absolutely none at all.
I was watching it, and then it got to like part 4, and I was like, okay, the twins are genius. Yeah, I get that. They're doing their sort of semi-Tetris block drawing things on perspex, and how did they know? And I looked it up.
I mean, I would assume that they're kind of child prodigies, right? And they might be well known. Their legendary prowess at mathematics and their skills to do with all that stuff is probably known across many systems. Edgeworth/Asmail got wind of them and thought, yeah, these guys are just the right people for the job. Because again, they're children, right? And their children, they're a little bit more, perhaps easier to manipulate than the wizened old adults. It's just easy to kind of whip in, nip them out, and then get them to do what you want them to do. And
yeah,
stuff.
I mean, they're still quite, they're like, oh, you tell us this, and then we promise that we'll cooperate.
Yeah, they do have a little bit of steel to them, don't they?
And as you probably do, knowing kids, I know that would be utter bullshit, and that wouldn't happen. And I noticed that Asmail was, he had to get them to do, Mestel's bidding, by doing their genius stuff. But if they were going to refuse to do it, he'd happily kill them, which would then put him in a worse position than he was already with them. So I was like, if you don't do it, I'll kill you. Then I'm screwed.
But they don't necessarily go with that. I mean, other mathematicians are available, no doubt. I mean, according to the novelisation, the twins' dad. What were they calling it? They give him a first name. Dad, played by Dennis Chinnery, who was quite a well-known actor back on those days. What's his name? Somebody Archie. That's him. Archie Sylvester. The whole first chapter of the novel is Archie Sylvester trying to figure out what's going on in his head. Right, he wants to kill the children. He hates them. He absolutely detests the twins, and their mum doesn't really like them either. Their mum she's just gone, right? She takes any excuse to get herself out. She's going and doing PhDs and all kinds of stuff just to get herself away from the kids. So she and Archie has this thing where he constantly plots to kill his children. So I thought, well, that's quite an interesting spin, because maybe that's why he then maybe he contacts Asmail and says, come and take the kids away and something, and confiscates the whole lot. But and just as an aside, actually, if you haven't read the novel of The Twin Dilemma, do it, because it's not the same as the serial.
Oh, really?
The story does follow the same beats. There's a few differences, but the biggest cast on the novelisation, which makes it very different, is Eric Sayward's writing style. Right now, this is Eric Sayward in his peak. This is peak Sayward, right? And he's more like it's more like Douglas Adams than anything else that exists within the Doctor Who kind of banks of literature, if you like. I remember the first time I read that, which wasn't that long after the first time I'd seen the story on TV, and I thought, what the blazes is this? Because it's just barking. There's a lot of extra detail in there where Eric goes off onto additional little side stories about certain characters, and it just. This is the kind of Douglas Adams part, right, where these things are just totally bonkers. They'll have relation to the story, but it's a whole little story in itself, and it's completely nutty, completely barking, and it's so different from his style in the novelisation of The Visitation, which is just very standard, very plain, very ordinary. You know what I mean? So anyway, sorry, that's an aside. So do you want to know what I think of this?
Yes.
Yeah, it's rubbish. Do you know, I was kind of thinking, right? I mean, subjectively, obviously, it's not rubbish. It's just I haven't seen this for a long, long time, but I remember when I first saw it, right? And I think there are many reasons why this story has generally appeared towards the bottom of the favourite to worst lists. And I think one of the biggest problems this story has is that it follows immediately from the Caves of Androzani, which is ultimately the most legendary, or one of the most legendary stories of the classic era. It was absolute peak Doctor Who. There was nothing, since I've been watching, that came close to the Caves of Androzani. It is just extraordinary. Phenomenal storytelling, phenomenal direction, brilliant acting, and it's tense from beginning to end. And when you finish watching that, you've been through something. There's a real emotional shift. And that final sequence at the end of it where Colin becomes the Doctor, it's such a disjoint. It's not a happy transition. It is genuinely, I remember this, it's like, who the hell is this guy? This guy. And he just sits up for that second or so at the end of Androzani. So you want to know more. And I think, John Nathan Turner clearly wanted people not to have to wait like half a year until they saw the new Doctor. And I think this is the second reason why the Twin Dilemma fails as well, because it doesn't give viewers the chance to get to know that Doctor. You take something, you take our, how does Sixie describing the effete previous incarnation, and you turn into this ebullient, violent, ego-driven, confident/arrogant, bombastic nutcase, this madman filled with glorious purpose, who strides out, as you said, onto that barren wasteland, who wants to become a hermit, right? Who strangles his companion almost to death, who terrifies her, who seems to have absolutely no compassion at all. And you leave your audience on that cliffhanger. That's a hell of a risk, when you take a likable character. And the production team and the story developers and everybody else know this is going to be the start of a journey, the viewer from dark to light, but the viewers don't. The fans will probably stay with it, but we're all going to be a little bit, oh, what the hell's going on here, right? And but what about my mum or my sister or my wife or my brother or whatever? What are they going to make of it, right? Now, that's all fine, right, providing the story itself, I think, is strong enough to kind of keep the attention going. And I think this is the other thing. Now, the story itself, I think it is relatively decent, or at least there's a good story in there, struggling to get through it. But it's kind of buried under so much stuff. And again, it comes on the back of the Caves of Androzani, right? The style of the Twin Dilemma is completely different. It's much more like something that was written in the 1970s. It's much more a kind of mid Tom Baker season 15/16 or 17 kind, probably more of a 17 kind of thing, with that weird humour and the kind of high end science stuff going on, So it's such a disjunct, right, from the Caves to this. It's very difficult as a viewer to kind of get your head around that tonal shift, and it's almost like kind of seems to be going backwards in time. That's what I'm saying. It's more like a mid-70s thing. You've gone from something which is looking forward, which is like no other Doctor Who that's been seen before. Directed with handheld cameras and right in people's faces, and lots of explosions, lots of action, real guns, and all sorts of stuff. To this, which is kind of high camp, has ridiculous rubber monsters. Is very over lit. The studio sessions are really, really bright. There's no hiding, and it's full of sci-fi cliches. It's one cliche after another. I'll give you an example. End of part 2, right? There's a self-destruct mechanism in the safe house, right? Yeah. Why isn't it just a bomb, right? But no, because it's sci-fi, it's got to be self-destruct, because that's how we create a cliffhanger. That's pretty awful. And there's a few of those throughout. I've made a bunch of them on my phone, but I don't want to bore you. I might just bring them out. However, right? So that's the whole thing. That's me watching it back in 1984. I genuinely hated it. I did not like it at all. I loved Colin. I loved Nicola. But I thought, and I did want to see more of it, but I thought the story itself absolutely 100% sucked. Sucked like nothing I've ever seen before or have seen since. And that stayed with me, right? I've never gone back to the Twin Dilemma until this weekend, when I suggested, we should look at it again. So, and I love the novel, because I read the novel then. But anyway, so back to current times, right? So I start playing this and I'm watching it, I think, oh my God, it's just as awful as I remember it. The whole of part 1, pretty much all of part 2, it's just... it's just unbelievably poor. I hate it again, right? But then at some point in part 3, things started to kind of happen. It started to come together. And I realised that one of the most important narrative threads going through the story, which completely passed me by on first watch, is something you just made allusion to a minute ago, Mr. Jeff, which is that idea of compassion. So the Sixth Doctor starts with 0 compassion, right? It's just not even in his vocabulary. He scoffs at it when Peri mentions it to him, that he should show some compassion, to Hugo and various others. And he just, you humans never cease to amaze me with your petty concerns and stuff like that. It's beyond him, right? But then, of course, he meets up with Asmael, his old mentor, and he's reminded of that time by the fountain when they got absolutely shit-faced and did whatever they did, and it was a great laugh and everything else, and that memory stayed with the Doctor, and it stayed with Asmael as well. And even though the Doctor and Asmael, they realise they're kind of antagonists when they first meet, and the Doctor still remembers it. And again, Asmael, when he's kind of consigned the Doctor to death in the safe house that's going to self-destruct, he too remembers that time by the fountain for what it's worth. But he's got other things on his mind. He's got a planet of people who've been held at ransom. So that's that. But then, of course, Asmael becomes the instrument of the Doctor regaining his compassion at the end of it. When he's holding Asmael in his arms
he's
at the end of part 4,
upset.
He's genuinely moved. And there are little clues leading up to that where the Doctor starts to soften. We start to see that other character when and I love the fact that Mestor calls him, "You're mad!" like he is mad. And when the Doctor barges in the first time he sees Asmael from setting him up with the self-destruct, right, and he goes, "Murderer! Traitor!" and dives straight into him. But then following that, we get this, and I was absolutely loving that. So the story itself on the surface is utterly crap. I think it's not crap, it's just really old hat. It's old school, full of cliched sci-fi that really should have been put to bed by this time. I honestly thought that the Caves of Androzani was the nail in the coffin for all of that nonsense, and we start to see something new and progressive. But sadly, that wasn't really repeated. We just kind of went back to the kind of template standard Doctor Who. The bright studio lights, the theatrical kind of setup, the multi-camera stuff. But at the heart of it, we do have this beautiful story of the Doctor finding himself and changing by the end of the 4th episode. So we get a little mini arc even within then. And there's a moment when he says to Peri right at the end, whether you like it or not, "I am the Doctor," or "I am the Doctor whether you like it or not." And that's also true for him as well, because he is who he is. He can change, but he changes physically, but in a way he can't change what makes him the Doctor. And he shouldn't have to. You shouldn't have to be apologetic in a way for who you are, as long as your goals are good. And I think the Doctor just needs to be kind of reminded that actually his goals are good, similar to what we get in the 12th Doctor. Am I a bad man, or whatever it is. That sort of thing. It's that self-questioning thing. So I at the end of it, I have reappraised my opinion.
Yeah, it's good.
It's never going to be my top 5 or my top 20 or even my top 100, but it's all right. It's not as bad as I used to think it was.
I didn't think it was bad at all, and I think all the points you made there are very valid, coming from the Caves of Androzani and things, and it's any episode that follows something great is.
It's going to be held to that standard,
tainted in a way, and perhaps viewed unfairly. So obviously the sort of big controversial moment in this story is the Doctor trying to strangle Peri in a moment of post-regeneration madness, and there was a couple of comments on Twitter here. Paul L. Quinn says the decision to include the strangling scene is the single worst idea in all of Doctor Who. Much of the story is fine. Obviously the costume is crap, and the big acting that will become the norm in Series 22 appears here. Baker makes an instant impression, but the rot starts here. And then Rob, the Rubbish Time Lord, says, I quite like this story, however I didn't like the scene where he was trying to strangle Peri. So I think the sort of general. Is there anyone who likes that scene? Probably not. So I think that it was a real shocker, and even now, having seen it before and watching it, I was like, I totally get why
they would never do that nowadays.
Well, you wouldn't be able to do that now. No,
you absolutely wouldn't.
You couldn't.
It's
it's
a pretty rough thing. Go on.
I understand. They were probably trying to look shocking. Look, he's crazy because of post regen, and what's this Doctor going to do? He's wild and everything. But maybe a better way to have done that would have been to have him tell Peri she was a silly turnip or something, and
turnip,
upset her, and then have to patch it up by the end or something, So yeah, I think it was a ill-advised action that probably hurt Colin's Doctor's perception.
Misfire,
But the intention to create drama was a good one, but they picked the wrong catalyst for it. I think
I totally agree. I think there's two things here, right? The first thing is completely bonkers, right? Which is that, and I watched this when I loaded the DVD up. It showed the Blue Peter excerpt, and I remember watching that Blue Peter, which went out on the day before Part 1 of the Twin Dilemma, and they show a few clips from the story. And one of the clips, to try and entice viewers to watch the Twin Dilemma, is the strangling scene, right? And Janet Ellis, who I used to love when I was a teenager. Honestly, she was my awakening back then. Anyway, I'm not going to go into that. That's a personal thing between me and Janet Ellis. But anyway, nonetheless, right? So they show this kind of the whole scene, and Janet Ellis afterwards, she's quite what does she say? I think I made a note of it, but I can't find it now. But she says, I hope the Doctor and Peri are on speaking terms by the end of it. Just to say, what the hell was that? And just kind of getting into the next item on Blue Peter, which I thought was great fun. But okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing I was going to say about this is that is a kind of indication of where Colin's season is going to go, right? Because it's completely uncensored in its in its violence, and that is the undoing of that era of Doctor Who, because the violence became so complained about, and so and those complaints became so persuasive that they forced the higher ups to kind of take some kind of decision. The initial decision originally was to kind of hold the show for a little bit, for 18 months between season 22 and 23, until we got until the production team kind of got their head around what they were going to do, and then obviously Colin's sacking at the end of that. So in a way, was it Paul Quinn who said the rot starts here? He's kind of right, because that moment did prove to be the undoing of that particular era of Colin. It's almost like there's almost like a Jacobean kind of tragedy about it. You're kind of defeated by the very first thing that you come across in your life. It's like a Chekhov's gun sort of thing. The first thing you see on the mantelpiece, that's the gun that's going to kill you at the end of the play. And it's kind of there, So when you think how season 22 played out with things like the Two Doctors, which is just ridiculous. Again, Robert Holmes has always had a dark side in his writing, and here Eric Saward just gave him free will, because Eric Saward again, loves the dark side of stories and people and characters. Lucy McCaul made the point that Vengeance on Varos is one of her favourites. I love it too, but my God, it is brutal. There is no respite in Vengeance of Varos. Nobody is redeemed at the end of that story at all, and we should maybe look at that one, because it's an absolute slay of a story. So this is the thing that kind of escalates through Colin's tenure as the Doctor, and it does become his undoing by the end of it. So there you go. It all starts there. Two things just from that one strangling scene.
Yeah.
Janet Ellis trying to cover it, and the rot, as it said. And maybe Russell the Davies is kind of right. This did signal the end of Doctor Who just from that.
Yeah, maybe because of how it became seen in the public eye and stuff, and the higher ups at the Beeb, like you say, having to sort of do something about it, and the violence and Mary Whitehouse and stuff like that.
I don't think it was even Mary Whitehouse. I think it was just generally, Yeah, I think she was still around, so she might have made her voice known by then.
Yeah.
But It was just generally, the way that the show was being reported in the media. I mean, John Nathan Turner always said there's no such, there's no such thing as bad coverage.
Yeah.
It's all the words written about the show were in its favour. It helped the publicity of it. No such thing as bad publicity. That's what he was saying. But actually, if the tone of that publicity is towards the negative, it's going to set in. It's going to have an influence at some point.
Yeah.
And if it starts having an influence on the decision makers, specifically a decision maker who's looking to axe the show anyway and needs the slightest excuse to do it, then it's there, isn't it?
Yeah,
so.
quite.
It's kind of hoist by their own petard in a way. And I've just seen, looking at my notes, another cliche, which is the fact that Asmail has a laboratory. Why would he was a ruler of Gioconda. Why would the ruler of Gioconda have a laboratory? It's just, again, it's Flash Gordon days, isn't it? Professor Zarkov, you are my prisoner. You will be taken to our laboratory where you will continue to work on our fiendish, dastardly plan. Take him away. It's that kind of thing. And you take the scientists away to a laboratory. What are they going to do? They're going to figure out what you're up to and put a stop to it and make some kind of concoction, which is going to destroy you, which is exactly what happens in the Twin Dilemma. The Doctor's looking around, notices a flask of some kind of stuff that he's going to throw at Mestor, and hey-ho, presto, that's what happens in the end. So, yeah, it's a bit tick, 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 tick.
Everyone's got to have a hobby.
Indeed they do,
well,
yes.
It's been fun looking back at this
Wait!
one. And,
I haven't finished yet. I haven't even talked about the brand new titles. I know you got to go, actually, but let's just talk about those, because the whole time tunnel thing, the
looks
Starfield
really cool.
at the start, beautiful. We'd had the same kind of titles out for Peter Davison. That was right at the end of Tom Baker, and a lovely. And of course, we haven't talked about our very good friend who plays Mr. Hugo Lang, of course, Kevin McNally. Who wasn't going to be in Doctor Who until right at the end,
Yes.
So he's good in it, Space Captain.
Yes, he is good, yeah.
Lieutenant, isn't he? They have this little running joke, this running gag about his rank. They call him Corporal, Colonel, Sergeant.
Yeah.
And then there's one at the end where both Hugo Lang and Peri both... No, was it... Peri says Lieutenant, and both the Doctor and Hugo say Lieutenant, right? Because she's American, so she says Lieutenant, right? Doctor calls him Corporal or Sergeant, and she calls him Lieutenant, and then they both correct her and say Lieutenant. That was it. That was quite fun. And there's little moments like that. The cave painting scene where they kind of look at the the whole history of the Giocondan. The idea of the giant gastropods being a myth, something from prehistory that kind of now rises and does for the planet, and one of them takes over the whole thing. The fact that Mestor has kind of telepathic powers, can sort of take over somebody. I often think with Mestor, it would have been better if he wasn't a giant slug. Right, if he was just a guy, you know what I mean. I think they're dressing him up in a costume like that just makes him look ridiculous, So I don't buy that. I don't buy the whole giant slug thing. I get it can be a kind of a metaphor. I think it works in an allegorical sense, but having actual giant slugs, they're always going to struggle with that kind of costume in Doctor Who. They struggled with the Tractators in Frontiers earlier on, and they even struggled with the Magma Beast in the Caves of Androzani. In the Caves of Androzani, Graham Harper, the director's idea to kind of minimise the effects of this really shit costume that's supposed to be terrifying is to turn all the lights down and cut the amount of screen time it has down to an absolute minimum. And even then, it still looks shit. So when it takes up a good 40% of the show and it's all brightly lit with the studios and everything, you got no chance, really. And, I hear a lot of people say, well, that's how it was back in the 80s, but it kind of wasn't. Things were changing in the 80s. Doctor Who was starting to look really old, by sticking to those kind of very old-fashioned ways of recording shows. Pretty much doing exactly what they'd done in the late 60s and early 70s. It hadn't really moved on that much until, again, we got to the Caves of Androzani, when Graham Harper is, doing a lot of outside broadcasts on film, and like I said, is getting right into the faces with a handheld, is coming down...
It's the weekly.
Is that you?
It's the weekly fire alarm.
Oh, that's the weekly fire alarm. When he's coming down from the gallery, which is where all the directors and producers normally sit, right, to the studio floor to direct hands-on with all the actors and the camera operators and everybody. So this is kind of back with Twin Dilemma by Peter Moffat, who'd done a few 70s and early 80s things. It's back to that standard. You know, and it just looks really old. And again, it's kind of giving the powers that be at the BBC more reason to kind of throw daggers at Doctor Who.
Yeah.
You know, it hasn't moved on. It looks really old. It looks really crap. Look at that ridiculous monster. You know, what are they talking about with sending giant slugs around? It's full of sci-fi cliches, this, that, and you know, it's more and more, and at the end of it, it's violent, and the Doctor tries to strangle his companion. What blazes are we making here? You know, so it's a really difficult one. I do agree that this is where the rot sets in, and despite the fact there is a decent story at the heart of Twin Dilemma, it's never given the chance or the scope to breathe, to shine. Colin's Doctor, throughout the whole of his run, is never given the chance to shine and to follow that narrative path. But there are some great moments within it, regardless.
Well, we'll take a look at some others over these next couple of weeks. Maybe we can
Indeed
do
we shall.
Vengeance on Varos next. And
we're going to do that. Oh, wait.
We can do, yeah.
Oh, yes, please, let's do that. I could talk forever on that one. We better book a 4-hour session. Because that's going to be full on.
And there's loads of audios to take a look at as well, like the Quinn Dilemma, which was the recent first part of the 40th celebrations of the Sixth Doctor, was just great fun. Loved that a lot. The 11, which was a box set from a few years ago, which had the 11 in it, obviously, which is the Time Lord who has all 11 personas kind of active in his head. That was brilliant as well. There was the Sixth Doctor and Peri series that came out. It says Volume 1 on it, but they've never done Volume 2, which is a shame.
Volume 1 of 1.
Yeah, they should. I don't know why they put that on there. Cry of the Vulturous, brilliant. Static, I've mentioned before, also excellent. Quicksilver, Order of the Daleks was excellent. So there's loads of stuff, so we can have a look at some of those as well. So thank you to everyone who gave us some audio about the Sixth Doctor, and people who commented about the Twin Dilemma, and we hope you've enjoyed this episode, and we'll be back again very soon.
Ta-ta for now.
Take care.